I still remember the wind first, long before I ever heard the name Haley's dog. It was a crawling kind of wind, the kind that slinks along the skin and whispers through the seams of a man's coat, carrying with it the taste of salt, rust, and memories better left buried. The shoreline outside Crescent Hollow was a forgotten one, sanded smooth by centuries of rain and tide, pocked with the bones of shipwrecks and the sighs of fishermen who'd long since stopped coming back. Some said the sea had moods up here, and I came to believe it. In the summers, it bared its belly in lazy rolls under a white sun. In winter, it rose like a wounded beast and broke itself against the black rocks as though the struggle alone could cleanse something deep within. But always, always, there was the fog. It wasn't like a fog I'd known anywhere else. It didn't simply blur the edges of things. No, in Crescent Hollow, the fog swallowed the world whole, swallowed sound, swallowed direction, and sometimes, it seemed, even swallowed people. The only thing that stood constant in all that gray was the lighthouse, skeletal, stubborn, lonely. And for as long as I can recall, there were murmurs, stories that danced through the village tavern after the second whiskey and clung to. The corners of letters that the children never read aloud, they spoke of something impossible, a dog, a mongrel, nameless or too named depending on who you asked, who sat each morning at the cliff's lip with eyes fixed eastward. The older fisherman swore you'd see him just before dawn, tail curled neat, coat always damp with sea spray, waiting like a soul who knew the tides better than any captain alive. He never barked. He never begged, and if you tried to follow him, he wouldn't let you. Some said he could smell the storms before they came. Others claimed he once dragged a drowning boy to shore, and then vanished before thanks could be given. There was even one tale, half whispered, half dared, that he walked on the ridge far above the waterline and pointed his nose toward danger, not with panic, but purpose, as though guiding. None of us knew the truth, but we all knew the name. They called him Haley's dog, not because he came with a comet, though the name had a cadence to it that felt halfway between omen and comfort, but rather because, like that rare celestial visitor, he only appeared when he was most needed, in the darkest sky, trailing some kind of quiet magic behind him. I didn't come to Crescent Hollow looking for legends. I came for the sea. And solitude, and silence. What I found instead was a story that began long before me, but somehow waited patiently to include me. And this story is not about superstition. It is not about tall tales stitched together with fisherman's pride. This story is about devotion, about healing, about the kind of soft, persistent bravery only an animal can manage, when the rest of us have long since curled inward. Because, you see, sometimes the clearest light doesn't burn in towers or lanterns. Sometimes it walks on four legs, with a coat like kelp and the eyes of something older than storms. And sometimes, just sometimes, it saves things we thought we'd already lost. So if you're ready, I'll begin the real tale. The tale of how Haley's dog found me at the edge of the world, where even the gulls flew low and the days began. With a question. Let me take you back to the shoreline, in the year when the winter lingered too long and I hadn't yet remembered how to smile. The lighthouse was never meant to keep anyone company. It was a sentinel, not a sanctuary, stitched into the granite backbone of the cliffs and charged with one task: scatter light when the dark came low over the water. By the time I took its keys in hand, the post had been empty. 7 months. I'd been told that was unusual, though the man who passed them to me said so with a tone that suggested he thought I fit the place too well. Quiet man, quiet job, that sort of thing. The sea doesn't pry. I came with 2 trunks, a flask, and only one picture, wrapped in oilskin and kept at the very bottom. Mary and Elsie, standing over a lemon cake, both laughing with eyes half closed against the sun. I, Never hung the picture. What would be the point? They were gone. 2 years since the fire. 2 winters since the house splintered like matchwood and the smoke robbed me of even their scent. And somewhere in the grief and the numb spaces after it, the idea of the lighthouse appeared. First as a half-thought, then a wish, and finally a plea. Places like Crescent Hollow don't ask questions of strangers, not when those strangers offer to take the graveyard shifts no one wants. I told them I needed work and that the solitude suited me. That was the truth. What no one asked and what I never said was that something inside me had slipped loose in those flames. Not just a family, but the rhythm of things, the purpose. They buried the wrong bones when the funerals came. So I kept to the schedule. That's what they give you at lighthouses. Schedules. Write in the log, light the lamp, monitor the signal, polish the lenses. It becomes a kind of hymn if you let it. Repetition as a bomb. Without it, the silence booms. With it, well, the silence just hums instead. Each morning, I boiled water, drank it plain, left the second mug on the table, opposite mine, unfilled, untouched, part memory, part madness. I never spoke to the chair, but I couldn't look at it either. Most evenings, I sat outside with a logbook on my lap, watching the sea flirt with the last light of day. I'd write in the margins, not technical notes, just other things. Half-thoughts. Sentences that began but never quite ended. There was comfort in knowing no one would read them, until the day I saw the Pawprints. It was just a smear at first, dark tracks across the lowest stone step, fading as they climbed. I crouched without thinking, fingers brushing the damp indent, not washed clean by tide, not yet dried by sun. Fresh. No sound though, no bark, no howl, just the sea again, gnawing the coast with its slow white teeth. I checked the perimeter, nothing. Brushed the prints away and finished the morning as usual. But I noticed the next day they were back, same number, same place, as though retraced with purpose. The chair across from me remained empty, but something had shifted just enough to make the silence feel different. On the 5th morning, I woke before light and waited at the top of the stairs. And that's when I saw him. He moved through the fog like something born from it, a low silhouette, careful-footed, coat matted and wet. He didn't look up at me, didn't startle, just sat precisely at the edge of the cliff, facing the endless water. I spoke. Not words, really, just a sound, tentative, somewhere between a greeting and a cough. He didn't move, not then. Minutes passed, maybe more. I stood behind the glass and watched him watch the sea. Then with no signal, no cue, he stood and left, disappearing into the gray the way morning leaves a dream behind. He came again the next day, and the next. Always early, always silent, always to the same spot. For a time, he acknowledged me less than the stones did. He wasn't a stray in the traditional sense. There was no desperation in him, no hunger in the eyes. He wasn't looking to be taken in. It felt more like he was drawn there, same as me, by something neither of us could name. Still, I began to wait for him, started putting out a tin of sardines just below the steps after my tea. The first few mornings he ignored it. Then one day, while I stood just inside the door, he licked the rim clean in 5 quick passes and went back to his post. That was the start of it. It didn't feel like a friendship. Not exactly. We were 2 broken things orbiting a space between fractures. But there was weight in his presence, a curious kind of gravity. I never asked him for anything, but I began talking to him anyway. Not full thoughts, more like pieces, half memories, names, questions that didn't need answers. Often, he'd sit with his eyes half closed, ears tuned toward me like a radio on low volume. Some days, I almost believed he understood. I started calling him Finn, not sure why. It just seemed to fit. Simple, C-shaped, and unmistakably his. He never came inside, but one stormy evening, as the wind peeled shingles from the side loft and the lantern. Glass whined against the gusts, I opened the door and found him curled in the lee of the stairs, his nose tucked tight beneath his tail. I didn't say anything, just left the door open a little longer than usual. He stayed outside. But sometime near dawn, I heard a sound, the shuffle of paws across the scullery tiles. And when I looked down the narrow hallway, there he was, lying beside the oil tank, with eyes barely open. Not begging, not seeking, just near. That night, for the first time in 2 years, I wrote more than the weather in my journal. I wrote this: there's a rhythm to the way he breathes, as if the sea left its tide in his chest. I think he knows something I don't. The chair across from mine remained empty, but that night I didn't mind quite as much. The arrival was always quiet. He never barked, not once. Just appeared. Some mornings it was as if the fog curled back like a curtain and revealed him already seated. Same place, same posture, same gaze locked on the horizon, like the ocean might speak if he waited long enough. It wasn't a ritual, because that word implies intent. This was something older than ritual. It was instinct, perhaps, or memory, a kind of remembering born into his bones. He arrived with the tide and left. With it, too, in those early weeks, I never saw him arrive or leave. One moment, he was there. The next, nothing but the wet paw prints on stone vanishing toward the edge of sight. I began to wake earlier just to watch him sit, and later just to witness him go. But he always eluded that, timing things with a magician's precision, never caught, never chased, never changed. The villagers, those few who still visited the inlet, post office, or stood near the tables at the cracked fluke, began to notice. They asked, not me directly, but around it. "Stray up on the cliff again, McAllister? That dog still keeping your porch warm?" I never answered with more than a nod, because I still wasn't sure he was mine to explain. There's a hesitation that lives in things we fear to believe. A superstition, maybe, like saying it out loud could make it less real. Or worse, call its silence into question. Some folks had started to say the wrecks had slowed that spring. The captain of the Morning Bell claimed he saw a shape cutting through the fog ahead of them like the suggestion of warning. Not quite animal, not quite shadow. But their course corrected, and the shoal they might have struck stayed unforgivingly unscathed. Another sailor claimed his mast light caught a glint, eyes. He thought, but instead of fear, he felt calm, even in 30-knot winds. No one said it aloud, but I'd bet every man at sea that season was quietly glad to know something watched from the cliffs. Back at the lighthouse, Finn, yes, by then I'd whispered the name enough to make it real, still kept to the margins. He accepted the sardines without fanfare. He circled wider if I stepped too close, unless I was seated, reading, scribbling. Then he would come nearer. Once, he lay only a few feet from me, dripping and unmoved even by the gulls that mocked his stillness overhead. On that particular morning, a storm rolled in from the southeast, one of those slow, creeping ones. No thunder yet, but the pressure changed, and the waves moved like something not yet angry, but thinking about it. I was setting glass over the lamp when I heard the bark. That was the first time. A sharp note, unexpected. It cut the day in half. I turned, heart skipping. Finn wasn't barking at nothing. He was fixed on a patch of distance, just offshore, where the water changed color in such a subtle way it took seasoned eyes to notice. Fog moved there, quick and low, almost intentional. I spun the signal eastward at full rotation, checked the bands. There had been no radio distress, but I trusted him. That's the strangest part. Not just that he knew, but that I believed it. Nothing came in that day. No ship, no lifeboat, no wreck bathed in reasons. But that night, a trawler captain limped into port and reported losing engine power near the mouth of Widow's Hollow. Said he felt the rocks. Closer than ever. But at the last second, turned port on a hunch. They say that's madness, he told the harbor master, hand shaking around a half-drunk mug of boilerplate coffee. But I swear to God, I saw a dog standing there, like it knew. I heard the story secondhand. Sometime after that, I stopped leaving sardines. I cooked fish instead. Halved it, one for each plate. He never came inside to eat it, but he'd sit just close enough that I could hear the soft crackle of bones between his teeth. And I, more and more, began to write, not logs or songs, but plain words woven into thoughts that hadn't had breath in years. I called him a seafarer with no boat, a monastic keeper, a symbol, a gift. I wrote this. He knows when I'm drowning, even on days when both feet stand dry. Later, I read the words again and admitted perhaps they weren't much about Finn at all. Maybe they were about me. One dusk, he sat close enough that I could hear his breathing synced with mine. We weren't touching, not even near it by most standards. But something about the overlap, his stare into horizon, my fingers brushing paper I finally wanted to fill. It felt like the thing I'd been waiting for. That night I dreamed of Mary. Not the fire, not the weight of smoke pulling at the air. Just her baking bread, humming some half-familiar melody while Elsie giggled behind the table. I woke, crying into my own sleeve, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't hide it from myself. Outside, Finn prowled the edge of morning, and when I stepped into the doorway, he turned toward me, not fully, just enough to meet my eyes. And in that look, I felt something strange. Not human emotion, not sympathy, recognition, as if saying, quietly, just once, I see you too. From that day forward, I made sure to fill both mugs. Still only drank from one, but the other, it stayed warm longer somehow, even in the wind. It started, as it always did, with quiet, the kind of silence that precedes something enormous, the kind that holds its breath. January had bared its teeth. Ice clung to the railings in long spindles, and the wind had taken on a voice again, high and needling, pitched like warning. Snow didn't fall in flakes, it came sideways, scouring every surface until the lighthouse looked less like a dwelling and more like a scar carved into the weather. Finn had been restless all morning, not pacing, he never wasted movement, but alert in that focused way of his, ears twitching, posture tight. He refused the cod I laid out, refused the water too, just looked east, fur stiff with hail. I remember stepping to the ledge and whispering, "What are you hearing?" "Boy." No reply, of course, only the hunch sharpening between my ribs. That's when the wailing came. Too faint to trust at first, a shard of sound carried by wind, made brittle and strange by distance. But it came again, louder, raw with cold and something deeper. Finn bolted. No hesitation, no glance. The cliffside path was a cruel thing in winter, but he met it with the determination of a creature called, not merely. Running, I grabbed my coat, my boots half-laced and slick with salt, and followed. He led me southeast, down through a gully where the wind changed direction and slapped the breath from me. I slipped twice on the ice, caught myself both times only just. Finn waited once, at the crest of a split rock looking back as if to say, hurry. That was when we saw them, or what was left of them. A lifeboat, no, smaller than that. A skiff, half broken and tangled in seaweed, jammed between two outcrops like a tooth in cracked bone. And inside, 3 shadows, human, barely moving, barely alive. No flares, no signal, just wet figures curled together, clothes soaked, lips blue. One waved an arm weakly before collapsing in place. Fanny was already halfway down the embankment. I went after him. No time to think, just let instinct possess my limbs. The rocks clenched cruel beneath my steps, greedy for footing. My fingers were raw by the time I reached the wreck, scraping ice aside to reveal faces. 2 men, 1 boy. The older of the 3 coughed blood onto his collar when I touched him. I shouted for them to hold on, that help was near, though I had no sure way to bring it. Finn barked, only the second time I ever heard it, and it echoed up the cliff like a bell. I didn't have tools, only rope. I tied what I could, lashed the boy to me, and climbed with him slung over one shoulder. Twice I thought both of us would fall, but somehow, by sheer will or madness, we didn't. At the top, Finn took off before I could catch my breath. He was gone again into the hills. I laid the boy in my own bunk, covered him with every blanket I owned. Ran back down, the other two were worse. By the time I returned, one was unconscious, the other muttering nonsense, names I didn't know, prayers in some slurred dialect, maybe from Newfoundland. Again I tied them, carried one at a time. My legs failed twice on the return. Blood ran into my boot from a torn calf muscle. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering, but I couldn't let go. By the time all three were upstairs, I collapsed. Hours passed outside reality, just shaking blankets, boiling. Water, pouring broth between cracked lips, praying in no particular language that life hadn't left them in the crevice Finn had found. That night, the storm reached its crescendo. The lighthouse groaned like a ship at sea, and the sea answered with waves that slapped rock with the rage of a god unsatisfied. I sat with the boy. His eyes fluttered under bruised lids, and finally, deliriously, they opened, glassy, uncertain, but alive. And outside the thick-glassed window, through break after break in the frost, I saw a shadow in the storm. Finn, still there, still watching, keeping vigil as though the sea had appointed him guardian long before I'd ever come to lend him my name. The rescue became village talk within the week. The cargo ship, Orion's Hand, had been struck by a rogue wave west of Heart's Pinnacle. Power lost, hull split. Everyone presumed dead until those three walked into town behind me, clinging to coats too big for them and eyes still wide with disbelief. I gave no speeches, had no story to offer except presence. But when the villagers asked how I knew to go, I didn't say my dog had barked. I just answered, the wind changed. Still, a name began brewing without my help. Not Finn, Hallie's dog. If before the tale had been whispered as myth, now it had weight, flesh, a face. One sailor, injured, still limping, got a tattoo of a wolf standing above a wave, lantern alight in its mouth. He said he'd seen the dog clear as an angel before blacking out. They don't all walk on clouds, he said, when someone called him foolish. Some bark into hurricane winds and lead the lost home. Finn ignored it all. He still came, still sat, still faced the horizon. Only now, the space beside me felt fuller. And for the first time since Crescent Hollow began keeping logs, I wrote a new entry. It read, "He howled before death came near, and stood like an old captain commanding angels into battle." Outside, the waves licked the cliff, and Finn slept without sound, chest rising in slow, sure rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened at all. The boy showed up first as a shadow. I remember the shape of him more than the moment. Thin arms, 2 long sleeves, boots a size too big and heavy with mud. He didn't come to the lighthouse the way others did. No hesitation, no wavering glance at the cliff's edge. Just a quiet declaration of presence, like the tide returning at low light. He never knocked, just sat down on the stone bench outside, legs dangling. Finn noticed him before I did, walked straight over and stopped, not close, but near enough to matter. The boy didn't flinch, just looked at him. That was the beginning. He came again the next day, and the next. Never spoke, never answered when I offered hello or asked his name. After the 3rd visit, I placed a tin cup of water beside the bench and an apple. He nodded once, solemnly, then returned to watching the sea. I found out later from Mrs. Culver in town. His name was Peter. She said he'd lived with an aunt east of Harrow's Tate ever since his parents died. She didn't say how, didn't need to. "What happened to his voice?" I asked. She folded her hands in that way people do when closing old wounds. Never had one, least not in the way we do. Still, he came, like clockwork, like memory, and Finn greeted him every time. It took less than a week for their silence to know one another. Peter would sit on the bench, Finn beside him. Their bodies turned the same way. Watching, always watching. I'd brew 2 mugs, leave one steaming on the sill near them, just in case. Peter never touched it, but sometimes he'd glance toward it, like the gesture alone was a kind of warmth. And then came the harmonica. I didn't see where he got it. It just appeared one morning, a dull, brass-tipped thing, worn about the edges. Possibly older than he was. He played with no sense of tune at first, just breath and metal, weaving shapes into sound. Uncertain at first, but insistent. Finn listened with a stillness I hadn't seen before. Not the alert posture of storm-curled fur or wind-sent tension, but trust, quietly deliberate. He even tapped his paw once in slow rhythm. That's when Peter smiled for the first time. It was small, almost startled out. Of him. But there, I said nothing. I didn't want it to vanish. Later that week, I brought down an old stool from the attic and set it beside the bench. Peter didn't sit on it, but he rested the harmonica there. Sometimes he turned to show Finn the instrument, held it in open palms like a gift. And then one frostlit morning, something happened I will never forget. He spoke. We were all outside, the morning crisp with that brave kind of cold that chases sleep from the bones. Peter was playing again, a soft tremble of a tune this time. Finn pawed at the edge of his coat, and then, clear as a bell, soft as breath, the boy said, "Finn," just the name. But I felt it hold the world still for a moment. His fingers froze on the instrument, eyes wide, like he hadn't expected it either. And Finn, he didn't move, just lifted his head and met Peter with that gaze of his, slow, wise. The boy put down the harmonica and touched Finn's neck. Not a pat, not a scratch. Just let his hand rest there like he'd done it 1,000 times. I wanted to say something, but nothing I had could match the language of what I'd just witnessed. Word spread. Of course it did. Town has a way of making light of any miracle until it starts feeling safer to believe. "Peter?" they said. "That mute boy." "You're joking." But Mrs. Culver confirmed it with a trembling lip. Said he'd repeated the name again when they returned home. Said it shook through the room like thunder in a chapel. Finn whispered into her wool sleeve with a smile that couldn't quite fit on his face. The benches outside the lighthouse became theirs. For hours at a time, they'd sit. Peter playing tunes simple and haunting as gull cries. Finn curled against his side with the patience of something sacred. I became the man who brought tea, who swept the steps twice, who kept the distance they seemed to need. But I understood that somehow, something inside the boy had broken open. Not broken down, no, broken open, like a flower meeting impossible light. And Finn had been the one to kneel beside the crack and wait. There's a kind of magic we rarely trust anymore, one that has no spell to speak of, no enchantment, no prophecy, just presence. Quiet, faithful, endless presence. Not every wound asks to be fixed. Some just want to be seen, and that's what Finn did. He saw. Peter spoke no other words that winter. That didn't matter. In spring, he began to hum, and sometimes sing half melodies that had no language. But when it rained and the fog hunched thick across the cliffs, he'd speak the name again. Finn, never louder, never more, just the name. Like a prayer, or a thank you, or maybe just proof. Not everything needs explaining to be believed. I would find notes left on flat driftwood near the lighthouse. Drawings, a boy, a dog, the tower, all drawn in soft pencil strokes, like waves that taught his hand to move. One showed Finn with wings. Another showed him holding a candle. I never asked Peter about them. Didn't have to. He was healing. And if the path of healing ran along a dog's trail, in the hush between sea gusts, then who was I to question it? As for Finn, he never changed. He never asked for thanks, still came every morning, still watched the sea. But when Peter walked up now, there was a softness to his posture, something that said, "I've been waiting for you." And maybe, just maybe, in some way, he always had. Sometimes things fade before they leave. That spring came slowly. The sea took longer to wake, as if mourning the long sleep of winter, and I found myself listening harder to each morning silence, wondering what, if anything, had shifted beneath it. And then one day, it was just different. I stepped out with 2 mugs in hand, steam catching the wind like cloth caught on a thorn, and found the cliff's edge empty, not dramatically so. No toppled stones, no trail, just absence. The bench where Peter usually sat remained untouched, the harmonica gone from its resting place. Finn's usual corner, pressed beside the railing, fur flattened by years of wind, was vacant. At first, I told myself he had wandered, a longer loop. Perhaps the tide had drawn his attention, or a rabbit, or some curiosity only he could sense. But he didn't return that afternoon, nor the next morning. I called once his name, thin in the wind, then stopped, suddenly conscious of how little sound it made, how small my voice had become without him. I examined the shore the way a grieving man looks through old letters. Every mark hinted at meaning. Each broken shell, each trail of sand that led nowhere. The villagers joined unasked. They came with lanterns, took to the rocks and the reeds. Without speaking, some brought spare coats, others tucked biscuits or oranges into their pockets, as though he might need them if found. They searched for 3 days. We found nothing. Peter kept coming, every day, but he no longer carried the harmonica, just sat in Finn's spot, staring east. The second day, he rested a hand on the stone beside him and didn't move it. I didn't fill both mugs anymore. Evening came heavy in. Those days, something about the sky dimmed more quickly, as if light found the cost too great without a witness. I wrote that in the logbook. The absence feels heavier than the dog ever did. Some villagers said they saw gulls circling the cliffs early the morning he vanished, low in slow spirals. One man swore he saw 3 birds flying in formation, then parting in perfect symmetry toward the sea. Stranger still, the ship captains in the harbor noted the fog had begun to linger longer, rolling in thick over the bay and refusing to lift until late morning. Some believed the sea had taken him. Some whispered he had been summoned away, his duty fulfilled, his path complete. But me? I believed he simply went, that it was his choice. Quiet, the way all his arrivals had been. Maybe he knew it was time. That thought didn't comfort me, but it gave the pain somewhere to rest. I found myself reaching for things that had once filled the edges of my grief: poetry, the hum of a stove, even music from the old battered radio in the kitchen, tunes soft enough that only the static-filled melodies seeped through. Peter still visited, but less often. When he did, he'd leave sketches on the railing. One in particular stayed with me, drawn with a trembling pencil on sea. Soft paper, it showed the lighthouse, lit bright, and beside it a small dog, curled content beside the beam. No cliffs, no humans, just light and him. I couldn't bear to keep it, but I couldn't throw it away. So I burned it, slowly, and watched the ash drift out to sea. Then came the morning I stood in the grass barefoot, dew soaking through the hem of my trousers, and thought. The light was never in the tower. It was in him, the dog who taught me how to not just see the world again, but to let it see me. So I carved something, out of driftwood and rusted lantern bars. It wasn't elegant or precise. I'm no artist. But when it sat on that patch of lawn, casting its long shadow at dusk, it looked like how he made me feel. A paw wrapped gently around a small, flickering lantern. I placed it facing east. Word spread, not because I told it. People left things there: shells, fish bones, leather collars, some clearly saved from long-departed friends. Flowers, too, though they never lasted. The wind loved petals, but not permanence. No one ever asked what happened to him. Everyone already knew. He was never ours to keep, but that didn't mean he didn't belong. He changed the rhythm of the shore, the heartbeat of a place thought forgotten. He slowed a man's fall. into silence, gave a boy his voice. So maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than most of us ever manage. I stopped updating the logbook in the way I used to. No more daily entries. But sometimes when the clouds hang low and salt thickens the air, I still write a single line. The same one over and over. He was here. And that, I think, is all I've ever needed to say. I still live near the bay, not at the Lighthouse. That's someone else's charge now. A younger man with steadier knees and better eyes. He keeps it well, polishes the lenses every Monday, logs with detail, watches the fog, sends me postcards once a season with notes like, "Lamp still burning," and once simply, "He'd be proud." I think of that, pride, as if a creature so unknowable could place his faith in something as flawed as me. But I suppose that's what animals do best. They see past the clutter, the explanations, the rehearsed smiles we wear to survive. They see who we are underneath and love us anyway. Peter visits sometimes, an adult now, if you can believe it. Taller than I ever was, with a gait that leans slightly to the left, like he's still making space for something at his side. He writes. He writes beautifully. His first book came out last year, thin, bound in. Cream with a gentle gold script across the front. Fin of the fog. He didn't ask permission, didn't need to. Inside the front cover, there's an old photograph, a rare one from the harbor's archives. A distant figure on the cliff's edge. Hard to make out. But if you squint, you might see a dog, or just a trick of the light. Peter says it doesn't matter. If they believe, they'll see him. He's right. Crescent Hollow hold. To the story. The villagers never let it drift far. There's a festival now, every spring. They call it the Festival of Light and Fur. Small name, quieter than most, but it fits like sea glass in the hand. Children carry lanterns down the cliff path, each one shaped differently. Some carve like paws, others like ships. One always like the lighthouse itself, the top flickering with a tea light no taller than a candle's. Breath. Dogs walk beside them, stretchers of every shape, from mutts to purebreds, all welcome, all adorned in bells and silk leashes. Some wearing little sailor hats, stitched by hand, some simply golden with the joy of the sea. And when the sun slips behind the spine of the hills, they all gather by the sculpture. They sing no songs. There's no sermon, only a hush, long and reverent. Then, one by one, the children and their dogs walk to the edge and place something there. A token, a drawing, a biscuit wrapped in cloth, or a name written on a shell. And the lanterns begin to glow. It's beautiful. It doesn't try to be. It just is. Some say it's silly, overly sentimental. A dog's just a dog, after all. But I've watched the hardest men in the harbor wipe their eyes beneath knit hats and turn away slow, as though guilt would swallow them whole. If they admitted what they felt, love does that, especially the kind that comes unexpected, unasked for, undeniable. Sometimes, after the festival ends and the wind scatters the last of the candle smoke, I sit where the bench used to be, the one Peter favored. It was replaced a few years back, got weathered hollow by the brine, but the spot's still the same, east-facing, empty, except there are mornings, not many, and never on cue, but just enough. Mornings when the mist clings low to the rocks and the gulls cry only once before vanishing into clouds, when the air tastes half like salt, half like memory. And in that half-breath between disbelief and hope, I hear it. Soft, measured, familiar, the sound of paws on stone. Not loud, not intrusive, just present. And if I close my eyes, I can almost feel the warmth of him, settled at my side, shoulder brushing against the rhythm of my ribs. All these years, and still, he walks with me. He finds me, even now. So if one day you should find yourself lost, not just turned around, but properly adrift, the kind where even your own breath feels like somebody else's, come east. Follow the shore. Don't speak, don't call, just wait, listen. And if your heart is quiet enough, you just might hear a gentle tread. through mist and time. And then perhaps you'll feel it too, that soft weight of something unseen, settling beside you like history. Because sometimes, when the world forgets its compass, a dog remembers.